Hello, everyone. We're going to start in about 3, 2. Are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, cool. Yes, we have got lots of people here. I think we're all going. I'm going to assume our screen can be seen. Welcome to the Community Climate Action webinar, where we're looking at a snapshot of key emitters in councils. I would like to start by acknowledging that we're speaking here from the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that we are working and living on land that was never ceded, and encourage everybody to jump in and change your Zoom handle with your name, organisation and the land that you're calling on from as well. So it's the 2 dots. I think we all know how to use that by now. My name is Alexi Lynch. I'm the Operations Manager at Ironbark Sustainability. Joining us today, I've got Imogen Jubb, Innovations Unit Project Officer and Snapshot Project Manager and everything Snapshot Climate. Matthew Sullivan Kilgore's on the line, the Head of Data Analytics at Ironbark from Tassie. Rachel Armstead, our Climate Project Officer, who's at the end of all of those hello at Snapshot emails that you write in. Dr. Richard Ryle, Technical Support Officer. We've got Paul Brown in the room too, Ironbark's MD, and Ben Shaw, Technical Web Developer, Communicator, Designer Extraordinaire. Charlotte and Susan, and I'm sure there are others I've missed, but they've got quite a few people online. In fact, we had about 220 odd registrations at the end, so we've got a lot of people here, a lot of familiar faces and names. It's awesome to see. Have a bit of housekeeping, go through some really brief, broad updates to Snapshot, just to fill people in, and then we're going to get into some context of community-wide climate action, talk about the key emitters reports, where I'm going to hand over to Imogen, and we've got 4 pretty awesome guest speakers here today as well. Ian McBurney from Greater Bendigo, Ellie Hall from Banyule, Anthony Weinberg from Waverley, Wallara and Randwick councils, and Aaron Gray from the City of Yarra. And they're going to talk about how they've approached that challenge of working within the community with the key emitters and reducing emissions. It's pretty casual and chill. We are, of course, recording, and this will be available to all. Hopefully you're all automatically on mute, but if not, still just to remind to put yourself on mute. And I think everyone knows how to use the chat function, but please jump in and chat away with any questions that you have. We do have some questions in advance, and just note that if we don't get to unanswered questions, we will follow up, and we are going to try and keep the questions related to key emitters and working with the community. So if you've got questions that are outside of that, please understand we might not get to them. It's not that they're not important, but we might not focus on them today. Then we'll have to follow up post-webinar to some of those. If you can, you've all seen this before. Everyone's presented before and knows what it's like when you look and you can kind of see no one's on the screen. If it is possible, thank you to Joel, who just instantly gave us his video. It's just so much nicer to be able to see faces, and then we can know whether you're nodding along or smiling or shaking your head furiously in frustration. So already so much better. Thank you. All right, we're Ironbark Sustainability, so an organisation of 40 or 50 odd staff who all we do is work with councils to help them reduce emissions. We've got a lighting team that works with councils' operational assets, smart lighting. We've got a climate team that works to help councils reduce their emissions within their operations, their corporate emissions, and the broader community. We also work a lot with partners in the industry in Australia and indeed globally. So Google, ICLEI Oceania, Cities Power Partnership, GCOM, the Global Covenant of Mayors, anyone that's going to assist helping us get software, tools, advice, projects, and information out there. And one such partner is Beyond Zero Emissions, an independent solutions-focused think tank, who we work with to develop Snapshot. And part of the ethos of Snapshot, as most will know, is to make sure that we've got data and information for everyone. Snapshot basically started through a series of funding organisations, councils that jumped in together, lots of independent technical reviewers. This is from about 2019 all the way to now. Everyone getting involved and making sure that we've, as a local government sector and as a community, got information and data that is out there. And every time we iterate and we improve, we managed to lift the information and improve information for all 537 councils in Australia, not just 2 or 3 that we might work with. And Snapshot's the only free and publicly available emissions profile tool. This is you. We've got a smattering of people from around Australia. Most of the people here today aren't aware of local key emitters. And I think of all of the pre-discussion or pre-webinar surveys that we put in, and we always try and put the information here so everyone's aware of where we're at and what we're trying to focus on. It was really stark, a lot of the information that came through. And so I think it's for another reason worth sharing, that only a small number of councils and organisations know where their emitters are from. And of those that actually know where their key emitters are from, even smaller amount have tried to engage with them. And most aren't ready to share those experiences. So that 15% is actually only about 6 or 7 organisations, and there were 4 or 5 universities and community groups out there who have targeted and have spoken to key emitters, engaged with them, and are ready to share, and only 3 or 4 councils. On the other hand, those that don't have that information all won't. Unsurprising, I would suggest. And I think encouragingly are really interested in working with other communities to understand the best approaches to how we do engage with key emitters, and those organisations, those commercial, industrial, agriculture, transport, whatever it might be, emitters within your municipality, and how you can best work with them, support, learn from them, so we can all work together to get to net zero as soon as possible. Not that many questions. This is every single question, or at least everyone that came from before yesterday. We're going to be able to get to a lot of these, so thanks for those that sent in. And there are some that we're going to have to get to another time. Some good ones there, some interesting ones, but maybe not for today. We also asked if you wanted to be famous, say something nice about Snapshot. I'm not going to share all of this, but I'm going to share one from Michelle from Cairns. Michelle, thank you so much. We love seeing that, and you're a darling too, as are all the people in Cairns. I don't know if the feds actually have preferred suppliers, but if that ever happens, sure, we'd love to be involved. So thank you, and sharing the love. Back to you. On to some quick snapshot updates. As most people would be aware, we've got some sponsors that have helped provide and support the information to their and all the communities, all 537 councils and communities in Australia. We're really very grateful for the support of these councils and organisations. And we've got some new snapshot sponsors for this year coming up. The City of Mission in SA, Stonington's coming on again. Thank you, Stonington, and Bayside in Victoria. The prospectus, I'll see if we can chuck it into the link at some stage. If not, we'll send it out afterwards, but that support is very appreciated. You guys can tell your communities that you are supporting the free provision of data to your community. One of the things that we've often asked is what you want next, and improvements for Snapshot, and data and accuracy has often come up as the most important one. Just to let people know, if you're not up to speed, that there have been some pretty big updates in the last 6 months or so. So now every Snapshot profile is consistent with Basic Plus. So we've got all that extra information there. You can drill down into subsectors and time series, so get an understanding about how emissions are trending over time. And we've also got federal electorates and states. And so I've got some very well-known now federal electorates here: Higgins, Indi, Wentworth and Curtin, that have all become climate-friendly members of parliament in the last couple of months, and maybe one that will become climate-friendly at the next election. And also just to note that we've made a change, not as aesthetic choice so much, but a accessibility choice. So those that have got colour blindness issues can now better off understand and see what's going on with Snapshot. And so that's some changes that were made at the back end from our team. So thank you to all of them. All right. Looking back at how councils have worked with key emitters and the broader community. It was 20 years ago today, or approximately 20 years ago today, where you stop laughing now, Imogen, I guess was trying to be all professional. That's me 20 odd years ago. but in actual fact was a pretty unprofessional wannabe, I don't know, bogan or tool, I'm not sure what I kind of was there, sitting on a really crappy car, looking around and finding the jobs that I might be working in. One of them was an organisation called ICLEI that most people will be aware of, working with councils around Australia and the world to reduce emissions. And being in my mid-20s, I had 3 or 4 jobs within the space of a year or so. And one of them was a local economic development officer. And this involved funding that we had from the state government in Victoria to do a pilot project with a bunch of councils to see how we can help work with their community, with their emitters to help reduce emissions. Being quite fastidious with keeping documents and information, I was able to actually find a lot of this old background info to look at how the sector has been working, maybe successfully, maybe unsuccessfully, in trying to engage with those emitters out there. And so this is all from 15, 20 years ago. This pilot involved 3 metropolitan councils and 3 rural and regional councils, and, workshops, slides, speaking to those councils and trying to understand, where there's business development opportunities, how you can link into the community, looking broader than just residential household retrofits or solar on roofs for houses, but looking at things like commercial, industrial, transport and ag emissions. How do we really get in there and start targeting these sort of things? Pretty familiar process, a bunch of workshops with those said councils, nothing here that would be unfamiliar 15, 20 years later, apart from some grainy photos and some people that are still actually at councils 20 years ago. And what we came up with was a bunch of projects. I might just go back to some of these guys. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that there's a slightly potentially frustrated person. And I'm just going to make a guess that 15, 20 years ago, as we were trying to figure out how we work with these community emitters and big emitters, this guy was just thinking, geez, I wish I had some sort of snapshot or understanding of emissions within my community, and then I would know what to actually do and what to target. We didn't have that. And so what we kind of ended up with was a bit of a hodgepodge of projects. So the City of Melbourne worked on green lighting technology for commercial buildings. Marybeck worked with the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, looking at reducing emissions within that sector. Gannawarra was looking at energy efficiency at the time. Hobson's Bay, big biodiesel project. Some were quite successful, some not, but it was a bit of an example of, or a snapshot, if you like, of the kind of way that we approached and have approached working with the community over the last 20 odd years. And looking back, I guess, and forward, one thing is quite clear, is that it has always been our responsibility as a local government sector to look within the broader community. So sure, it's only a small percentage or handful of emissions which are actually operational or corporate emissions, but that doesn't abrogate our responsibility to make sure that we're looking at the 99% of emissions out there. And that has always been the way. If so, anything, it's just more urgent now. The data, a few years ago, we worked on a project with Cities Power Partnership that looked at the city's activities database. We've got 13,000 odd actions and activities from councils around Australia and the world. And what we kind of find is that often where we as a sector are putting our time and effort in the community doesn't really align with where the emissions are. So as an example, maybe 20, 25% of emissions are from the residential stationary energy sector, yet 50, 60% of all of the actions are focused there. And so potentially we've got ways to improve that. We think that Snapshot can kind of provide a bit of a foundational piece of work there. These are the kind of tools that we need to make sure that we are then focusing on the right areas, and the kind of tools that we want to look at and improve on, not just for the last 5, 10, 20 years, but also for the next 20 years. And this is where Imogen's going to come in and tell us about the key emitters data. I'm not the only one that's going to have photos of me 20 years ago looking interesting. Do you want to really quickly explain that?
I guess 20 years ago, I was working on threatened species surveys around the country. This is me in the Simpson Desert, where I was tracking hopping mice and dunnarts and snakes and all sorts of creatures. And I guess everyone comes on a journey, I suppose, to get to this point around emissions data. And my starting point was on how do we actually protect creatures. And it's led me to looking at lots of data, which is a bit of an interesting process, but that's where I was 20 years ago. And I miss it. It was a really nice place to be.
And we also asked Matt, who's online today, everyone knows Matt, to send a photo. Matt didn't do that. And so I jumped onto AI. Sorry, Matt. But I basically said, I need a photo of Matt from 20 years ago. He's passionate about solving climate change and he really loves data, outdoors. And,
this should be good.
and this is what it came up with. So this is using deep fake technology. So I don't know, this is Matt 20 years ago, just sitting there below, I think that's Rob Law from the CBGA, for those that might understand and know some of the Alliance crew. Imogen, thank you for that, and over to you.
All right. Yes, please. That'll be helpful. So we're going to introduce you to a new layer of information. This comes partly as a result of your feedback. So this is one of the questions we asked you at the launch of the snapshot data last year. The data accuracy and granularity we've smashed out in the subsector and time series component of snapshot. But the next biggest area of interest was large emitters. So we've spent the last few months running some pilots with councils, working with our data sets to try and see what we can deliver on this area. Just look on the next slidey spot. Okay, so Snapshot provides a really clear foundation of understanding what your emissions are in your community, but it doesn't necessarily lead you to what do you do next. And understanding who the key emitters are in your community can really help with understanding this. So most councils have, every council's got their snapshot profile, but most councils, according to the information we've gathered in this survey, do not know which organisations are responsible for those emissions in their community, and they don't know the scale of emissions that come from these large key emitters. So without this information, it's pretty hard to map effective actions or map effective actions with that kind of large scale kind of approach. So there's a disconnect, and this is particularly where Matt was coming from in looking at this work, is that communities, councils are setting targets to try and reach zero emissions by 2030, 2035, 2040, 2050. But there's a big disconnect between their capacity to reach those targets and their ambitions. So hopefully this new resource will help fill in some of those gaps. Yeah, sorry. So this is certainly not all of the solution. It is a piece of the puzzle. So the key emitters profile will provide this resource. It will let you know who the key emitters are in your community. It will let you understand their proportion according to your community-wide emissions. And we are hoping that it will let you lead to effective relationships with those key emitters so that you can have a really foundational community-wide response where they're brought along for the ride. So we know that councils themselves are a really small slice of community-wide emissions, generally in the 1 to 2%, occasionally in the 4 to 5% if they have wastewater treatment or landfill. But most councils will fall into this 1 to 2%, which in some instances would mean you are yourselves a key emitter, and we can provide that information as well and insert council emissions into the kind of key emitter community-wide profile. But in most instances, there are other companies in your community that will play a really significant role in these key emissions. So this is an example of a key emitter profile for Ballarat. And I believe Ballarat's in the audience somewhere, so shout out to you. There are the circle in the middle is the snapshot profile. So that is the same information that you would see on the snapshot climate. But what we have done is added some extra layers of information around these key emitters. So the blue part is stationary energy, and you can see that there are 2 companies that have a significant chunk of stationary emissions in Ballarat. One is McCain, and the other one is the Bellarine Gold Company. The light blue is gas emissions. And again, those 2 companies are also significant emitters in the gas sector. And then the pink part is the industrial processes and product use. And again, the same 2 key emitters are key emitters in that particular profile. Well, what this can do, if the council has a relationship, either through your economic development units or other sections of council, is you can start to actually build a relationship with these organisations, understand what their pathways, trajectories, plans, profiles are, and align them with your community climate action planning. Another example is Gladstone, and they have quite a different profile. So about half of the emissions in Gladstone actually come from industrial process and product use, and of that half, almost all of it is down to two particular companies, Queensland Alumina and a RTA Yarwun. So again, the same companies are responsible for a really particularly large spread of emissions in 3 sectors. And there are some additional companies that also play a role in the gas and stationary energy sectors. Just to indicate that different councils will have different kinds of profiles. So Banana is an adjacent council to Gladstone, but they have a very different kind of spread of emissions. And just also to illustrate, at this stage, it's unlikely that we'll see key emitters in the transport sector, mostly because the transport emissions are distributed across specific, collective users rather than individual companies, but there's occasionally freight or public transport companies that will pop up in there. And similarly, agricultural key emitters will pop up, but not in all instances. So they will be represented, but I'll talk to you a bit more about that in the process of how we collect this data and why ag is a little bit trickier. So we are launching today this key emitters portal. This just gives you a kind of insight into what you will see. It shows you where your key emitters are. It shows you both them as a table and the pie. It provides a little bit of information about what the companies are and what they do. And we'll talk more about that next. So I know a lot of you will have questions around how have we sourced this data, where does it come from, what's the process, blah, blah, blah. So it is based on the same foundation as Snapshot Climate. It follows the GPC protocols. It's nationally consistent. It builds on a range of data sets that are publicly available. And it is a process that we are working on, and we will continue to add data and build data to this work. But as a start, we will look at the safeguard mechanism registry and see if there are any emissions data available in your local government area that come from safeguard mechanism. And this will be activity data from those companies, so actual emissions that are reported on an annual basis to government. We will then look at the NGAs registry. And so as an example for NGAs, this might be a company like Coles or Woolworths, which have multiple sites across the country. So in that instance, we will, the total of the companies are reported, but not the amount from each individual organisation. But what we have done is use jobs data to allocate a representative amount of emissions to each site. So that is not activity data, but it's a pretty accurate estimate. Then we will look at the national pollutants inventory and do a similar sort of process. So we can look at that data set and then allocate emissions according to the number of jobs in each municipality. And then we also look at a sort of bespoke process where we can get data directly from, like sometimes companies will provide this data if we ask for it. Sometimes councils have data. Sometimes we can source it from other places, but that will get added into if it's available. And as always, methodology and processes around this are as transparent as we can possibly make them. We haven't published this process yet, but we will update it to the methodology that is available on the Snapshot Climate when we're ready to. We can also do a deeper dive than what is currently in the key emitter profile. And that will take us, we're doing some pilots with a number of councils on this at the moment, but this will look at things like schools, public schools data, large commercial or retailers that are in the community, things like fast food outlets, and other kind of associated commercial applications that we can find data for. And then that will provide a sort of another layer to the information behind the key emitters profile. So that's another piece of work we can do. Another piece that is not currently in the portal, but will likely get there, is looking at business as usual analysis for those specific companies. So this is Qenos, which is a company in Hobsons Bay, and this is a business as usual. So without any kind of particularly targeted activities or target setting or climate action plans, their emissions will reduce significantly over the coming years, mostly due to the decarbonisation of the electricity grid. But if we want to look at above and beyond business as usual, we can actually try and work with those companies to source that information as well. And we can also do little cheat sheets on each company, which provides whatever public available information there is on their targets, on what their plans are, what their climate actions are. You know, are they laggards, are they leaders in the community, and give an indication of how willing they'll be to engage in the process. Feedback from the councils that we've been working with to date indicate that the key emitter data is really helpful for supporting any project plans that you're working on, supporting business cases, supporting the work that people are already doing and taking it to a new level. It provides a decision-making tool that they don't currently have, which allows them to focus activities and look at things like what's the best bang for your buck in terms of activities that you invest in. It helps to align existing work and prioritize projects and streams of work and funding as well. It also clusters stakeholders to prioritize. So if they're in the same kind of category, you can work with them in a different kind of approach than, and I think, you know, even examples like McCain's, where they have both stationary energy and gas emissions, the solutions for those two different sources will likely be quite different. So targeting, you know, which part you focus on is also helpful. Provides data to drive decision making, which is something we are really keen on providing support with at Ironbark, and also helps to advocate both internally and externally for better funding, better policies, better planning processes. If you're interested in this, we can add the link to our expression of interest kind of form. If you sign up here, we will contact you to see what we can do to help you. That's it.
Thank you, Imogen. And I think, Ben, you just put the link in earlier. Do you mind just chucking it in there as well, just while we've got this page open? So if you're interested, click on the join our beta. You don't have to then get involved, but just we want to see who's interested in giving this a go and playing around and joining up. And please keep those questions coming. They're looking great, and we will get to them. And we'll pass some of them hopefully to our guests. And we're just going to get into our guests now. Our first guest from the city of Greater Bendigo is Ian McBurney. Hello, Ian. Ian is an ecological sustainability practitioner for almost 25 years, has inspired and enabled tens of thousands of businesses, manufacturing, government, schools, communities to move towards a better climate future. And many of you potentially have seen Ian speak or being involved in some of the Vox Bandicoot workshops from way back in the day. He's currently the coordinator of the Bendigo Climate Collaboration, working with about 15 of Bendigo's biggest organisations to create a zero emissions city by 2030. They've had a fair bit of, I don't know, success and challenges over the last few years, but this is kind of all Ian's been working on for the last few years. And Ian was also kind enough to show us what he looked like 20 years ago. That's him on the, well, you can just guess which one he is. You said about 85 photos, but I can only get 3 in. Sorry, Ian. Ian, how have you used data on key emitters within your municipality and for your project?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Lex. And yeah, just for those who don't know, on the right-hand picture there, I'm in the middle. That's Pop Dover. The Dover family were born again greenies in the early 2000s. They didn't get it, and then they found a whale stranded on a litter trap in the Moonee Ponds Creek, and they were totally converted. But Fox Bandicoot days were good fun. So Greater Bendigo Climate Collaboration is the project I'm working on. So what I'll do is tiny introduction to the climate collaboration, and then I'll just basically quickly say this is what I've learned about working with business once you've got that key emissions data, and then talk about what we're doing next with that data. So the climate collaboration took 3 years to put together, and a lot of people ran away screaming at the start because they just wanted to reduce emissions today. But relationships take time. Your personal relationships take time. Your business relationships take time. And we had to get everyone on the same page and get everyone saying we actually want to come together and reduce emissions collectively, because we're all trying to invent the same wheel inside our individual organisations. So we did a whole lot of work over a long period of time. But we have organisations like Bendigo Bank and Colaban Water and Agnico Eagle, who own Fosterville Gold Mine, the biggest emitter in our region, La Trobe Uni, Catchment Management Authority, RECV Solar, a whole lot of businesses around the table, and it's been great. The snapshot image for Greater Bendigo has been used in every single presentation with over 1,000 people around Bendigo in our engagement in the last year in creating a zero emissions roadmap for the city. It's helped us to focus our efforts evenly across different sectors of our economy. But the one thing I've noticed when you put the snapshot chart up is that there's no one pointing the finger at anyone else anymore. In the early 2000s, the farmers used to say it was the people in the city, and the people in the city used to say it was the farmers, and the business people used to say it was the households, and the households used to say it was the businesses. But when you look at the chart, it's pretty clear that it's all of us. And so it's kind of just removed that conversation totally, and everyone's just like, okay, yeah, we've got a bit of this job to do. So over the last 25 years, I've worked with thousands of businesses on sustainability. From in 1999, a WasteWise business project with the automotive manufacturing sector in Melbourne that isn't there anymore, which is just weird. Environmental management system training, small business programs where you've got to pound the beat and walk in the door. And the first time you walk in the door, they tell you to get nicked. And the second time you walk in the door, they go, oh, I recognise you. And the fifth time you walk in the door, they go, let's sit down and have a chat about energy. You've got to build up a relationship with a human. And then since Fox Bandicoot, been working with manufacturing companies, with hospitals, with car companies, with all sorts of different businesses. So before I get into the data, I just want to give some things that I've learned over the journey in working with these key emitters. And the first is trust, relationships. You've got to start where a business is at. You can't start where you're at. They don't often have a sustainability person. Local government will have a sustainability person, but these key emitters often don't. They have really clever people. They have asset managers, they have strategy people, they have finance people, they have really clever executive teams, but they don't have that one person who's got their head around sustainability and their energy costs and waste costs and water costs and whatever. So you've got to find those people, and you've got to build their knowledge over time to get to a point where they understand and they're ready to go. You've got to talk to business people in their own language. So they're interested in costs and products and people and marketplace. And you've got to talk to them in that language. Energy costs are a massive problem for business at the moment. So you can just go straight in and work with them on that. But if you can get free PR for the business for doing good things for the planet, that really helps them as well. Cost, product, people, marketplace is their language, and make sure you go in with that. Businesses, especially these big businesses, they're not necessarily interested in talking about sustainability or climate change, but they are really interested in innovation. So they'll be like thinking already about how to transition their fleet to electric vehicles. For example, they'll be thinking about microgrids, they'll be thinking about batteries. So talk to them about those innovation things because they just love it. They're not interested in just your project. So if you walk in the door and you're doing a waste project and they've got a 3-metre skip in the corner and they've got a $10 million wastewater treatment plant in the other corner, don't worry about the skip, even though that's what you're there for. And the last one is economic development units at councils. They often have really good relationships with businesses already.
You've gone mute there, Ian.
Yeah, I just went mute. Anyway, I'm back. So yeah, your economic development unit have good relationships with business, but not around climate and sustainability, unless you're very lucky. So what you've got to do is also develop a relationship with your economic development unit so you can get an in with business. So back to Bendigo, we've been working with our Bendigo Regional Manufacturing Group. We've been working with Bendigo, which is the Business Council. We put out a survey last year and got 50 responses back from businesses with what their needs are and what their critical challenges are that relate to climate and energy. We have spoken at a number of business events just to let people know this is who we are, this is what we're doing. We haven't gone in and said, right, jump on board. We're building a relationship over time. And the large emitters data was quite helpful for us because we've got one massive emitter in Bendigo, and they're already on our collaboration and sitting at the table. So they're interested in investing in a solar farm, they're interested in a PPA, they're interested in demand management, they're interested in electric vehicles. So that's great that we've got them around the table already, and we can show them this is the amount of energy you're using compared to the whole town. And they're like, wow, okay, how can we help? We also have a list of another 10 or 15 businesses that we didn't quite know. When the data was coming through, our manager actually ran a competition in our unit for a week, see who can get the most number of the top 10 energy users in Bendigo. And it was interesting because none of us in the unit got all 10, and some of us got 7 out of the 10, but it gives you data that you don't necessarily know about, or businesses that you don't necessarily know about. So we've now approached all those businesses and said to them, in July, we're launching our business program. We'd like to meet with you beforehand. We'd like to start building that relationship with you. And that's been very helpful. So we've just launched our zero emissions roadmap. We've got a business program that we're launching in July. It's going to help businesses set up their own roadmap to zero emissions. And then we're going to provide some support for business to do some energy upgrades, to set up PPAs, to put solar on the roof. So we've been building, building the relationships and building a movement that business understands and has been involved in the creation of, and can kind of shape themselves. So how's that, Alex?
Absolutely brilliant, Ian. And I think given that when we were trying to find people to speak, and we showed you at the start who's ready and who can speak about this, there's not that many. This has been a challenge. And I think the important thing is, like, it does take time, and the way that you've outlined that and have been involved before, you're at council as well, and then at council for the last few years. That's a great little snapshot. Thank you very much. Stay on the line if you could, because we will get questions, I'm sure, from people, and wondering whether we can try and capture some of that as well, maybe, and send it out to everyone afterwards, because there's a fair bit of experience there that we don't want to be reinventing. Thank you very much, Ian. I'm now going to pass over to Ellie from Banyule, the Community Climate Action Lead at Banyule City Council, who's responsible for implementing policies, programs and initiatives which support the community to reach Banyule's goal of carbon neutrality by 2040. And Ellie, that's Ellie 20 years ago. Thank you, Ellie, for sending that on school, I imagine 20 years ago, Ellie.
Yeah, McLeod High, still in Banyule though. So
very good.
Moved far.
Yep. Ellie, tell us, how have you used this data in your municipality and what have you learned?
So we got our community climate action plan through council in 2018, and we went hard straight after that in implementation for our households, our sort of 3 emissions sources were commercial, industrial, households, and transport. So we were like, households, this is easy. We can do something here, and have implemented a bunch of programs there. Our sustainable transport team took on the task of transport and have made some progress. But in the back of my mind was always commercial, industrial, and how we go about trying to support them to lower their emissions. So the first thing I wanted to do was know a bit more about where they come from, and this key emitters report has really helped me understand exactly where I should be targeting. So that emissions report came back and told us that 16% of our commercial emissions were healthcare, and of that 16%, 48% was coming from the Austin Hospital, which wasn't a big surprise, but it is a big place in our municipality. So the first thing I did was try and get in touch with them, and it took a while, but I've now got the sustainability manager of the Austin Hospital on our environment and climate action advisory committee. And so we're opening a conversation, building a relationship to try and work out how we can coordinate action, work together, support each other in advocacy to try and reduce those emissions there. The other big emitter in our municipality was manufacturing. And we have a business park, Heidelberg West Business Park, that is where most of our manufacturing happens. So I went to our economic development team, which were a treasure trove of relationships, as Ian described, and got in touch with their association down there. And so started having chats with them, and we worked out the best thing we could probably do is implement environmental upgrade finance, which is what we're doing now. And so we're going to have that as an option for the businesses in that park. The report itself also gave me the names of a few of those manufacturing businesses that are the biggest emitters. And so we know how to target, we know who exactly to target in that business park to try and reduce the most emissions we can. So it's kind of saved us a lot of time and research, and really helped direct the work in that space. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellie. It's so interesting too. I'm just reflecting on the different experiences too. And I know, if ever you're speaking to people in general, and they ask, oh, so what should councils do to reduce emissions in their community? It's like, well, it kind of depends on who you are. It's very different in Banyule to in Bendigo. And so maybe instead of just saying, do a PPA first or look at transport, it's like, first of all, understand exactly where it is, because if you could get Austin and the Heidelberg West Business Park to reduce their emissions, that's going to be a massive chunk of the community emissions, potentially more than you could do looking elsewhere. Thank you. And if you're able to stay on the line too, that'd be awesome. We've now got Aaron, who has a minor issue getting photos to us because he's got some computer and battery issues, but he certainly tried his hardest. Aaron's been at the City of Yarra on business sustainability for about 4 years, working with large emitters to encourage and support them to switch to renewable energy, and led the Business Renewables Buying Group pilot project and looking to expand that to cover all Victoria. And Aaron's got a banking and finance background working with corporates, which I think makes your experience and I guess learnings pretty damn valuable. Tell us, how have you been using it and how are you going with sharing it from beyond Yarra?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Lex. First of all, I'd just like to say to Ian, you've summed up so much of what I was going to say and talk about, and everyone always wants to jump to solutions, but so much of this space is about building relationships with your businesses. And running at the moment, the Business Renewables Buying Group, the key question I'm getting, and this didn't come from Ian because he's been working on it for a number of years, but is how do we know who our big emitters are in this space? And how do we know who our big electricity users are going to be and whether they're going to be suitable to potentially be recruited into a group PPA situation? And then how do we start those conversations? When I started at council nearly 4 years ago, I wish we'd had something like the key emitters snapshot, because we had those exact same questions and we're still trying to work through them. And we're also going to get this data to formalise and confirm what we think we know. Because it is a long, slow process to be able to build up that data, build those relationships, and get to a point of being able to have detailed conversations with the likes of, in Ali's case, the Austin Hospital, who is a really big user, but they're big corporates with very small sustainability teams and a lot of drivers that are not sustainability issues, despite what their press might say. So for us, this key emitters data, and for all those business organisations out there who are thinking about projects like the Business Renewables Buying Group, and should we join it? How do we join it? How do we know? I think this is a real shortcut to who those emitters are, but also that extra piece of information around what are they actually doing? What commitments have they made? And I think in the chat, there was one question around, how do you deal with stakeholders, which are often international and things. One of the things we've really found with the pilot and all my discussions with businesses across Yarra is often the most progressive ones are the internationally owned businesses where the targets have already been set and mandated in Europe or North America. And they're having to fall into line here in Australia, and they're looking for solutions. So, yeah, really valuable shortcut to starting those conversations. And from there, it's just a matter of actually starting those conversations and building those relationships and acknowledging that it's going to take you time. So, yeah, that's my observations, Lex. And sorry, I couldn't get a photo. Moved house too many times and a few things in storage and not on a digital backup either.
You're lucky I didn't ask the AI. But maybe for the next one I will.
I'd have been intrigued what it came up with. I did have more hair at that point in time.
That's to pay for the AI one. It's not like whatever the chat GPTs. You hear that, Matt?
So we're all on his good.
Yeah, it's all over. Thank you, Aaron. If there's information on, and maybe we can talk about later about how you can get other councils to get involved. So again, on the PPA, we'll keep that discussion going too, if need be. But it's great to know that you're able and willing to share, as Yarra always have done. So appreciate your thoughts and being here. And our final guest today is Anthony Weinberg, who's the 3 Council Regional Environment Program Manager working at Randwick, Waverley and Willara. This is Anthony 20 years ago. He spends his time designing and implementing programs that make meaningful contribution to greenhouse gas emissions in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. Passionate about solar, EV, renewable energy and working with community emissions. He really wanted to meet Elon Musk one day, but now he's not so sure. Very cool. Anthony, I guess the same question for you. How have you used the data? And I'm also intrigued, one of the things that I guess we're looking at through this process, which is a bit of a beta process at the moment, is looking at that ancillary and extra data. So not just the high level stuff that might come from safeguard mechanism angers, but schools, for example. So I guess the first main question is, how have you used data to make sure that you're targeting the right areas, and give us a bit of a background on the school side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Lex, and thanks. Yeah, the photo I'm really happy with as well, Aaron. I've got a bit more hair there, so I'm happy to keep that up as long as possible. Look, we used the data to give us, it took us to a point, and it's sort of, I would use the analogy of, it's like the driver's license to get you on the road. Doesn't mean you're a good driver or you've got experience, but it just got us to a point where we were able to, get confidence to design and implement our own projects. So we did a exercise back in 2014 where we produced a low carbon future plan for the eastern suburbs. And it, typically it went through all the technologies that can reduce emissions and the sectors and subsectors, and analysed all of the emissions reductions potential of all of those, as well as cost benefit analysis. And I guess it problem was it only took us so far. And, coming from the sort of consulting sector, reading all the other strategies that are being done by each council is, I realized, councils have a lot of strategies, but they're not very strategic. So it only got us to a point where it said, you should look at these sorts of areas, solar and apartments and small businesses. And what we sort of then did was took it to the next level, where we said, let's explicitly, quantifiably look at where council could influence and actually quantify that. Like, where do we have control and power and influence? And having done this strategy, we went first of all to our big emitters, and we found that they weren't very receptive. So we have a couple of Westfields, and they're like, yeah, we've got our own sustainability team that are telling us what to do, and we'll do what we want to do when we're according to our roadmap and basically bugger off. And then we spent a lot of time like working with a precinct, a pretty high emitting precinct hotspot, which had a university hospital around Randwick and lots of schools as well and research. And that sort of didn't yield very good results. And I guess working out where we had influence was really important. So we sort of quantified that explicitly. We said, you know, where do we have direct control in terms of, and that sort of came out in terms of planning and waste. Where can we show leadership and, you know, be leaders to our community and influence change that way? And where can we sort of show market facilitation and sort of transform a market? And I guess what we worked out was sometimes it's better to pick off a smaller chunk of an emissions pie and have greater influence. And so from that, we designed a program called Solar My School, which was about reducing emissions in schools. And we quickly realized for them, it's not about the money, like solar basically pays for itself, as everyone knows, but it's about all these other barriers to do with time, knowledge, trust. And so we sort of designed a facilitation program that overcame those. And it's been going for about 5 years, and we're, you know, installed 5 megawatts of solar and worked with over 200 schools now, and it's expanded sort of outside of our area. So that's been really successful, and I guess we've spun it off to have a Solar My Suburb program, which is about community organisations now as well. So we pulled a smaller chunk of the pie and said, look, what can we do to actually change that sort of subsector? And at one stage, I think we were, because of that program, we were responsible for 12% of the solar ever installed in eastern suburbs, which has decreased a lot. Now, I think we'll probably be in 2 or 3%, but at one stage it was pretty high a couple of years ago. But yeah, in terms of how we've used the data, I've got a few sort of just jotted down some notes for this seminar. I think what we think makes it success, how you turn the data into something successful and into a successful project, is, you know, trying to actually target specific. We've sort of moved away from technology, and we're trying to really target subsectors where we think that council's a natural partner, and we've got scope for influence, like schools and community organisations. So for schools, for example, we've gone back to them and done some water projects and some waste projects because we've developed that partnership approach. Once again, I think this was mentioned before, we think it's important to target emerging areas. So, you know, solar was at the cusp of going on that sort of adoption curve to going really, you know, mainstream, and where council can sort of show leadership and also transform the market. So we're focused now on a lot of work on electric vehicles. So we think the way to leverage our influence is about market transformation, getting in early, being part of that early adoption curve. We also try and focus on areas where we can sort of prove additionality. So things that wouldn't happen without council influence, and where work is being undertaken by state government or regional groups of councils or federally. And then finally, I think what works well for us is doing projects that are a combination of like technical engagement, advocacy, and infrastructure. They seem to like work well with our sort of council skill sets. So where you can sort of bolt on other components to it is they sort of tend to be the more successful projects, and where we can sort of start small and scale them up. And they're the ones we try and focus now, reject the rest basically. And yeah, the data is really like what I would say about, you know, data is like analyze it, break it down, do all the conventional things, and then add a lot of unconventional sort of analyses to your data and see if you can sort of twist and pull it and really sort of pull out something that is meaningful out of it. It just doesn't have to be about cost and emissions reduction potential. You can keep segmenting and analyzing and breaking it down any way you want.
Awesome, Anthony. Thank you again. And I love the concept of schools. When I guess there's two things to this. Firstly, when I first got in touch with Anthony, it was through a project with the OECC, who are here online today, about developing emissions guidelines for councils in New South Wales and potentially around Australia. And a special thank you to Anthony, because we did a survey on the draft versions of it, and Anthony was very open and honest and said, yeah, I'm not really sure it's going to be valuable to me, which meant I was able to call it and talk and learn more about why so much of where he's already at is quite well advanced. And I guess that to you, Anthony, firstly, having that sort of honest feedback to us meant that we were able to have that discussion and learn about some of these projects that we weren't really aware of. And the schools one as well, which my initial thought was that's probably not going to be too much. And then you took me through when it's all aggregated. And as you say, 12% of all solar at certain stages put a really different slant on it. And fascinating. So thank you for that back then and for this now. Really appreciate it. I will now jump to questions. So most of the questions are being answered in the chat as we go along, which is great. But we did have some from in advance, and I think potentially a lot of these have actually been asked. Responded. Everyone sort of has, like, what's the best approach for rolling emissions reduction into usual council business? Might move away from the. I've got a great one here actually. Then from Charlotte from Hawkesbury. So for all of you guys online, what's the administrative load, work health and safety requirements for effective community collaboration projects? E.g., do you think it would be difficult for a council with a little budget and resources to be able to start something like this? Ian, maybe I'll start with you, all of you guys, just quick responses, quick initial thoughts there. Is that too hard for a council with little budget and resources?
I think it's obviously harder if you've got less resources, but the key thing is to spend the time developing the relationships, because if you can get some of the key emitters together and build relationships with them over time, they know how to get funding. Like they know how to talk to Oz industry, and they know how to talk to the state government and the federal government, and they know how to rally politicians, and they've been doing it for a long time. And the politicians might actually like them coming with something really positive as well, rather than something that's usually the politicians are getting wrapped over the knuckles. So if you don't have budget, like, you've got time. So develop relationships with the businesses and see what they're keen to do, and then bring them together and then see if they can help find the funding for a program. Awesome.
Thank you. What funding can local communities potentially access? So Aaron, Ellie and Anthony, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. This is from someone from Warrawak, Mount Alex Shire. So community workshops or discussions or reports, is there anything there you're aware of funding for communities to implement change?
There's a great website called Grants Guru. I don't know if you have access, but maybe your local member has access to it, and has a whole bunch of different grants and funding streams.
Great. One from Emma from Griffith Uni. How can this kind of data help councils identify and manage their transition risks? So I'm wondering whether, and Aaron and Ellie, if you guys want to start with this one, has the broader understanding about the risks around transition come up in any of the discussions, Ellie, that you've had with council's own risks and I guess the broader community?
Not as yet. I think this is very much a starting point for us. And so it's about opening up those discussions and then I guess drilling down into what those solutions might be comes a bit later, and that might be where you kind of go into those chats.
Aaron, any thoughts from you or broader background?
Yeah, definitely has come up, particularly in the health space, and where they're starting to look at transport solutions, but also backup generation and potentially switching away from diesel generation to batteries and things. And it always comes up when you start the conversation about renewables, and people just have that question about intermittency. If I'm on a renewables PPA, am I going to be without power? All those sorts of things. So the question comes up. Yeah.
And you're able to help identify and manage those risks, you found?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you've got to be really careful, and you've got to understand the industries and things. So, you know, in the health space, I can't be out there preaching and telling them that the solutions are there around EVs for ambulances and other things, but it's about recognizing that and trying to bring the right people together to have those conversations around what infrastructure is required to back that up. Obviously, in the renewable energy space, then yes, we can talk to it and do have those conversations, because, you know, all of the renewables deals are confirmed. So there is no problems. They're not disconnecting from the electricity grid to be standalone or anything like that. You know, so that's an easy misnomer to dispel. But, you know, other areas, you've got to acknowledge that the risks are real, they're unknowns, and, you know, they're going to take the transition slowly.
Thank you. Sadly, we're at 1:12. It's not going to finish right here though, because I do want this last minute to be used to ask for some feedback, firstly, and get all of this information and the slides, and also get a document that outlines a lot more information on our understanding or the way that you can access this info, and also some legacy documents that we thought we'd put in from 15, 20 years ago, just so you can get an understanding about how councils have been reducing emissions and what's worked and hasn't. And I'm just going to try, if it's not in the chat already. Is anyone? All right. We would love feedback, basically. And I'm going to chuck it in. Maybe I forgot to put it into the running sheet. There's a feedback form right there. Please click on that link. I'll leave it there for a bit and we'll keep it open for a few more minutes. Thank you to Ian, Aaron, Ellie, and Anthony. Really appreciate you giving us a succinct, quick summary, but it's just saying quietly behind the scenes how not experienced 4 speakers that have all just been able to speak with such an authentic experience, understanding about the challenges and some of the things that have come together. We're tempted, looking at the questions and the amount of people that have responded and come to this webinar, to even maybe develop a 3 or 4 pages summarising some of the key things. We'll see. You know what? If someone in the feedback form was to say, this is what I really want next, then we would do that and maybe respond to the info and the FAQs or QA docs from what came today. But we really appreciate you guys coming along to share those experiences. It's an ongoing challenge. We've got some of the foundations there, and I guess we've got some to come and move forward. Let us know what you think. Sign up if you want to discuss it further or receive more information, and we can chat. But we really appreciate the support that we always get through these snapshot programs, the guests that come along and the questions that come as well. So thank you very much. We'll see you at the next one. Always give us a buzz if there are specific things that you want to talk about. Otherwise, bye for now.